Good morning. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and today is Wednesday, the 16th of September, and we're here today to talk about a program that we hope will help businesses during this difficult time of the pandemic. We know that we've talked about public health and which portions of our economy, once having been closed, in order for us to work through the pandemic spread, and as they start to open, and what the impacts of the economy are there. And we've seen that we're going to need to do a lot of work to get ourselves back in the direction of where we were economically, as a county, as a state, as a nation. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about an initiative that we have here in Westchester County that is being operated through Bridget Gibbons, our Director of Economic Development, and she's going to explain the program in a little bit greater detail. And then we also have Dr. Marcia Gordon, who's the President and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester, who will comment as well. And of course, her organization has done some very dynamic efforts to try to help deal with this business climate issue. She's part of our reopening task force that we impaneled a number of months ago now in order to discuss ideas and deal with how do we handle the economic side of this pandemic impact. And as we've talked before, this impact has multiple heads to it. One element of it is the protection of public health, the primary one. The second one is how we handle the financial pressure on Westchester County and its revenue and its workforce and ability to deliver service, and then how it affects the community at large, the individuals, the small businesses, the large businesses. And of course, that's what we hope to help with this. The federal government passed fairly early on in this process the CARES Act. That's an acronym, but it was meant for COVID relief to be used within certain parameters. And we've looked at those parameters as a county government to be within the program guidelines, but at the same time creative in a way that we think would be helpful. And what we're going to talk about today is a program called Business First. And FIRST, as we always try to come up with a cute acronym, stands for Financial Investments for Recovery and a Sustainable Tomorrow. That acronym alone is probably worth continued compensation and employment. But Business First is really designed to offer an immediate financial relief to small businesses and nonprofits here in Westchester County that may have been negatively affected by COVID-19. And that's no doubt a large group of entities. There's an allocation of $10 million in grants, up to $49,000 to eligible businesses and not-for-profits. And as a catalyst, a word that we're using specifically to describe our economic development efforts, but as a catalyst for economic growth and vitality, the Westchester County Office of Economic Development really does recognize how small businesses and nonprofits are essential to our economy and our quality of life. All of those organizations employ critical jobs. To the extent that we've had a job loss through certain businesses that had to close, we want to try to stabilize those that are in difficult situations. And if we can provide perhaps the bridge through these grants that may make the difference, then hopefully it'll be productive and we'll see the multiplier effect by those businesses doing well, those jobs remaining in force, and then as the whole nation rallies, hopefully as soon as we find a vaccine and as soon as we find a antiviral treatment, then we'll be on the road to recovery, full recovery. So I'm going to ask Bridget Gibbons, our Director of Economic Development, to describe the Business First program in some detail, and then when we go from there, I'll be happy to introduce Dr. Gordon. But first, Bridget Gibbons.
Thank you very much, County Executive. I'm very pleased to announce this new program, Westchester County Business First Grant Program. We are allocating a total of $10 million in grants to businesses in amounts of up to $49,000 for both eligible businesses and nonprofits. We do recognize that our businesses are suffering, and they do need an infusion of cash, and this will allow them to to retain employees or to rehire their employees and other aspects of the business that they've really been struggling with due to limited capacity or a decline in customers due to the current crisis. So we realized early on that our businesses needed assistance. We did a survey, an economic impact survey, and 75% of the businesses said they knew that they were going to lose business. They knew that they were going to be struggling, and so we quickly reacted by pulling together this program and some other programs that we've implemented over the course of the last few months. So I'm going to jump into some of the details. So eligibility, businesses and nonprofits that employ 99 or fewer people and whose primary business location is in Westchester County are eligible. They also must be in good standing with Westchester County and demonstrate a revenue loss of at least 25% since March 7th of 2020. So we're really targeting people that, we're kind of doing well, and then when the crisis hit, that really, hit their bottom line. They have to certify that they were a financially viable organization prior to February, so that they were a successful business, and not because of anything that they did, their business is now struggling. We are. If the organization received funding through the Paycheck Protection Program or the Emergency Disaster Loan Program, they should not be using this grant for the same purpose. So they can use it for future expenses or other expenses, but not for the same expense. And all types of organization structures are allowed: LLCs, sole proprietorship, et cetera, except for non-locally owned franchises. There are certain business types that are not eligible, and for a list of those business types can be found on our website, and I'll give you that URL in just a bit. Some examples of how the funds can be used: as I mentioned, retaining or rehiring employees, and paying employee benefits, paying rent, mortgage, addressing temporary COVID-related restrictions on business activity. So, for example, our restaurants that can only function at 50% occupancy. A restaurant could use the money to purchase heaters so they can continue to serve outside as the weather gets colder. And in increasing technology, now that we have more people working from home, if a business needs to upgrade their technology to accommodate that, that would be acceptable. Marketing plan, business plans, buying safety equipment. So, for example, if a business decides that they want to upgrade their HVAC system and have the MERV 13 filters, this money could be used for that. And I think restaurants are probably looking closely at that, because having an upgraded HVAC system with the air purifier at the MERV 13 level will give customers the confidence that when they eat inside the restaurant, they're safe from the virus. And we're trying to be as flexible as possible with the use of funds. The prior programs that have been offered have been pretty restricted on how the money could be spent. This one, we're really trying to work with our business to get the money out there and have them use it for what they need to help their business get back on track. The Westchester County Office of Economic Development is administering the program, so we'll accept the applications. We have implemented a scoring system, so we'll review the scores, and it's based on a number of criteria, such as how many employees, how they're going to use the funds, and so we will take a close look at all of the applications and then make a determination. Applications will be accepted starting on Monday morning, this 21st at 10 o'clock a.m. and run through September 30th at midnight. The application will be found at westchestercatalyst.com/business-first-programs/grants. And so, as I mentioned, we will have a selection committee that will review all the applications, and businesses will be notified probably by the middle of October if they've been awarded a grant, and then the funds will be out probably in early November. So we're really excited about rolling this program out as quickly as we possibly can. Unfortunately, there's some businesses might not be allowed to have the grant for various reasons. They're not eligible, so we will notify those businesses and give them an explanation as to why. I just want to thank County Executive Latimer for his leadership on this program, and Joan McDonald, our Director of Operations, for her guidance. It's a pretty complicated process, and I've really had some great support from the team. And I also want to thank Marcia Gordon, President and CEO of the Business Council. She was very helpful in helping me to shape this program, as well as Jan Fisher of Nonprofit Westchester and Mike Ramita from the Westchester County Association. All the help is very, very much appreciated. And we are confident that this new grant program will help restore financial resiliency in Westchester County and help to get our economy back on track. Thank you.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
And then a second, when we go to questions, Bridget will be able to answer any questions you may have on the specifics of the program. We're also joined by Dr. Marcia Gordon, President and CEO of Business Council of Westchester. Marcia has been as outstanding an advocate for the businesses of Westchester County, small businesses, large businesses across the board. She and her organization have not been slowed down by the COVID incidents. In fact, in some ways, their advocacy has become more important now for those businesses, many of whom were doing very well and didn't see the need for that advocacy, but now they understand what it's like to have somebody who is rooted in business. She is a person who will speak truth to power, so those of us in government know that sometimes when she comes to see us, it's to tell us something that we're not doing that we ought to be doing, as well as, more importantly, to help us do things that we should be doing, which is really what we're talking about here, to turn to other people's expertise. We are not an arrogant government. We know that there are people outside of our four walls that know things that we don't know. We want to try to be as practical as we can be in addressing this need. And as I'll also talk about in a second when I give my summary comments before questions, we're looking at a lot of different areas of need in the society. One of them is the business community. There are others. But to have Marcia and her organization as allies on these programs is essential for their success. So without any further conversation, Dr. Marcia Gordon.
George, I can't even think of a time when I came to you and said you aren't doing something, because your team has really, really been so proactive. And Bridget, congratulations and thank you. The Business Council of Westchester is extremely supportive of this program, and we do applaud the leadership of County Executive George Latimer and Director of Economic Development Bridget Gibbons in developing this initiative for small business and not-for-profits. These are really the engines of our economy, employing so many in our county. These sectors have been especially hard hit and desperately need any financial resources to survive, and these are considerable financial resources. The county is also analyzing which sectors have been hardest hit so that these resources can be deployed most effectively. It'll be important to make sure that all businesses are aware of this opportunity. So outreach via business organizations, community-based organizations, religious institutions will also be extremely important, and I know are part of the plan. The Business Council of Westchester is certainly completely committed to share with our outreach networks to over 1,000 members and our robust database of county businesses and not-for-profits, as well as through our social media channels. This is certainly a ray of hope for those organizations struggling to stay alive and to keep people employed and to keep jobs in Westchester. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcia. So just before we start our questions, we have some of our friends in the media who are in the room, and we'll invite them to ask their questions in a minute. And then for those who might be remote, because we are trying to socially distance and protect everybody, including those who cover these news stories, you're welcome to reach out to Catherine Chaffee, and she'll provide those questions to us, and we'll answer those after we've talked to the folks who are in the room. Just as a bit of a summary on these things, today's program is part of a series of actions that we're trying to take to address something which we all have admitted now for 6 months. It's almost a cliche to say it, that's unprecedented in our adult lifetime. This pandemic has caused everything to be turned upside down, and in every way, shape, or form. Westchester was ground zero very early on for the first big outbreak of the infection. We were first. We weren't the worst, but we were first in this area, and so ever since that point forward, we've tried to be as practical as we can in addressing the elements of it. From this podium, we've tried to be very honest about both good news and bad news, whenever we had it, about the spread of the infection, and we've talked about the different strategies to control the spread of the infection. Even as the society was locked down, businesses were closed and entities were closed, we still dealt with certain things like our recreational facilities to try to make determinations of how they could stay open if they could. And we made decisions that were on both sides of the open or closed debate. We weren't ideological about the approach. We tried to be practical. We think that's what Westchester people look for. They look for as much as you can bipartisan government and as much as you can practical-minded government. And if we make a mistake, to admit it, correct it, and move in a proper direction, and not not to be tied by anything, ideology or ego, on a path that isn't productive. We know that amongst the many things we have to deal with is the revivification of the business community. And we are not the controllers of the economy. No government is, or should they be. But we can be partners. And I think tomorrow we're going to be back here to talk about some things we're going to be doing in housing initiatives for people who are renters and those who are homeowners who face crises in their residential situations because of that, and how the county can be a partner in those situations and how we can help people. We've had conversations here about how to deal with food insecurity, where there are people who don't know where they're going to get their next meal from, and how can we help those organizations that do that. And that is the message of this program. This is a partnership. This is an effort to work with businesses, in this case businesses of a certain size or smaller, that may not have access to some of the capital resources that larger businesses do. And there are larger industries that are dramatically affected by this COVID crisis. The airlines industry, the hotel industry, as an industry, have been devastated by this. But in this particular case, we can do what we can do. And access to CARES Act money that can be appropriately used for these purposes, because these purposes are to deal with the outbreak of COVID. And as Bridget went through some of the eligible situations, just practical mindedness, putting up plexiglass dividers in almost every business where you interact with people. You see it in retail stores, you'll see it in a restaurant context. That is an extra expense to businesses. And a business that's been in difficulty, doesn't have the kind of volume of sales now that they had before the crisis, where do they go to get those resources? How do they access it in a way that will help them survive? Because if they can't do those things, then they can't continue to function under the rules as in this state the governor has set down. So we're trying to be a partner. We hope this is going to be a helpful program. And with that, I'll stop talking and open it up to any of your questions.
So I think you might have alluded to this, but the county's getting the $10 million from the CARES Act that it was given to by the federal government.
That's correct. The CARES Act allocation for Westchester County was a significant amount of money, and we've allocated $10 million of that, carved that out as a set-aside to use for this specific program. The grants are in increments that go up to $49,000, and they are grants, not loans. And if the organization falls within a level of eligibility, which Bridget went over, and when you'll get this in writing, and so you can look and see some of the details of it, and that may trigger some questions, when you get back to put the story together. The thinking being that we can justify this because these expenses will be things that people had to do because of COVID. They were financially viable before COVID. They weren't suffering and about ready to go under before COVID. They were viable, and now they've become challenged economically because of the pandemic, and the allocation of this grant money will help them rally and be able to function and be able to attract business and hopefully stabilize as we go forward.
Are there statistics of how many businesses are in Westchester County and how many are going to be able to get this help?
Well, the final allocation of grants is capped off by a $10 million amount. They can apply up to $49,000. So if you take the maximum number, let's round it off for mathematical purpose and say $50,000, you can do the math and see, in somewhere in the vicinity of a couple of hundred businesses could, in theory, be assisted, depending on how much they're asking for. If they all ask for the maximum, if they ask for a lesser amount, then you could satisfy more of those businesses. The screening process as to which businesses ultimately get awarded these is embedded in what Bridget said about a committee of people looking at the different needs and the degree of need and how the application expresses what that need is and whatever process it takes. We obviously do not have enough money to satisfy every business. And that is the unfortunate reality of things, but at least to show that we've been able to allocate a certain amount toward this purpose. And if it is successful as to our wildest expectations, then we will try to look to see if there's additional resources. I mean, we'll make that decision based on how this round goes. And I believe Bridget said this, but if it isn't accurate, anybody who does not make it into the cut that's eligible, there'll be people who don't get it because they're not eligible. They're, the local franchise of a national chain, and they wouldn't be eligible. But if they are eligible, but they didn't make the cut this time around, those names are going to be retained. And if there is, conceptually a second round of funding, then there'd be an opportunity for them to come back and take a look at that point.
You said this is a part of a series of actions that the county is taking to help, not just businesses, but the housing, food security. It's a whole series of things.
Yeah, we've already announced at various other times a number of different other programs. I don't want to water down this presentation by referencing them, but just in passing, we announced a food insecurity program of $3 million, where we were putting additional money into feeding Westchester and into a number of local food pantries to help those people who were out of work and could not feed their families by providing additional resources for that. There was an earlier program, which still has a grant allocation, where we took $500,000, a lot less than $10 million, but $500,000 from our IDA program, Industrial Development Agency program, for smaller grants and loans, things that fall into a smaller area. But that was targeted for small businesses to get personal protective equipment, PPE, because there is a requirement to have masks, and in some businesses, gloves, and a small business, mom and pop type business, that could be an expense that might not be reachable for them. And so that program was put into place, and that is playing its way out. The IDA board will be voting on those allocations of grants. So that fits a category here. This program fits a different category of need. And as I indicated, we're going to be talking a little bit about what we're going to do on the housing side of the equation. I believe it's tomorrow as we finalize a series of programs. The most important thing, Michelle, is that since we don't have a roadmap, we haven't been down the line for something like this, problems manifest themselves. And as we see it, then we sit and discuss, what do we do about this? Is there something we can do about this? And in the case of this particular funding stream, which is the CARES Act money, we had our key people, Joan McDonald, our Director of Operations, Emily Saltzman, our Deputy Director of Operations, Ken Jenkins, our Deputy County Executive, our budget people, analyze the rules, and will the rules allow us to do something like this? And then when they do the research, the homework, and they say, yes, we can put aside a certain amount of money for that, and we've worked out the specifics of the program to match what's eligible for CARES Act spending, we're then able to launch something like this, which is why we're announcing it today. We expect to be swamped because the need, we think, is great. But again, we're pointing ourselves in the right direction. And I would say, as a harbinger of something larger, we're trying to be innovative here at a relatively local level of government. And every week we talk to our towns, villages, and city governments, and we kind of try to work cooperatively along those lines. The state government above us and then the federal government above us has the same capacity to be creative. And I'm not here to challenge anybody, but I think the federal government has to look at how do they take the resources they have, not just give it away blindly, that's insanity, but to be practical about how do you invest in rallying the economy. Just to say the economy will bounce back is not enough. Just to assert that as soon as something happens, we're going to get this big shoot up in the economy is far more complicated than that. I spent 20 years in corporate life in one particular industry, and I was in sales and marketing, and I thought all the time about what would make a company buy our product service. And that was part of the sales process and part of the marketing process. You have to get inside the head of the client. What are the needs, wants, habits, expectations? Classic definition of marketing. And it was a challenge to figure out how to present your product in light of your competitor, in light of the marketplace you were in, and the economic climate that you're in. It's the same challenge we're trying to do in government. We're trying to break outside the normal 9 dots and say, what could we do? What resources can we tap? And can this help? And as a pilot program, notwithstanding that's $10 million, if it works, then it becomes something that we can expand, and perhaps other people will look at it and say, hey, that pilot and program was successful in Westchester, perhaps it has a larger applicability. That, to me, is what the federal government has to look at in terms of dealing with this COVID virus. It's not enough to just say, yes, we have problems and we'll work our way through them, but to try to be creative and see if you can build off of these ideas. And if they work, they work. And by the way, if they don't work, we change them. We do not marry ourselves, anchor ourselves to something that isn't working and sinking. And I think that kind of flexibility is what people want to see. They don't want to see us argue across the ideological borderlines. They want to see us do something that's productive, and if it works, to expand it, and if it doesn't work, to modify it.
Marcia, are you seeing, are there businesses who have indicated that this is something that they would want to take part in? Or?
I'm absolutely positive that there are businesses that will want to take part in this. We hear especially from our smaller businesses, particularly anyone related to hospitality. And remember, hospitality isn't only restaurants, though the restaurants desperately need it. It's also events. It's also the people that did the website for the event, or the marketing person, or the camera people. There's a great need across the board not only for hospitality, but other sectors as well, and our not-for-profits also. And at the Business Council, we have 140 not-for-profits as members. We're very connected. We're very connected to them as business entities and as employers. So I think this will be very, very welcome news for the tens of thousands of small businesses across Westchester County.
Any other questions?
I just wanted a question, Ms. Gibbons. You know, the county executive alluded to this, but this sounds like it's going to be a very competitive process. How are you going to choose?
Yeah, we have established a whole set of scoring criteria, and it's pretty comprehensive. Everything from how many locations is Westchester your primary location for your business? How many employees do you have? What are your plans for using this money? How much business have you lost since the March 7th declaration? So it's a very well thought out set of criteria that we will be basically scoring each application on. And do they have other sources of funding? And that's another, if they have, significant amount of their own funding, then maybe we would go, allocate a grant to a business that didn't. So we have a well-established criteria that we'll be using. Unfortunately, $10 million sounds like a lot, but, as a county executive, we know we have about 39,000 small businesses in Westchester County. And, we're going to be able to assist if everybody requests the full amount, about 200. So it's while it's going to be a fantastic program, it is going to be competitive, and potentially we can do more in the future.
The criteria that you are saying right now includes a minimum of employees for a business?
It could be a solo business, so you don't have to have a minimum. We are kind of considering the kind of the ripple effect of these grants. So if you had 80 employees and you now have 40, this grant could help you bring back the additional 40 that you had to lay off. So we're thinking about that, where, how could we maximize the use of these dollars to get people employed and to get, these businesses back on track.
And you said they can start applying starting Monday?
Monday morning at 10 a.m. and it's on the westchestercatalyst.com/business-first-programs/grants. Okay. You're welcome.
Any other questions from our friends who are in the room? If not, I'll ask to see if we have any remote questions. No remote questions. Very good. Well, if anyone from the press who's covering this remotely have any questions, please reach out to Catherine. We'll try to answer them for you. If there are any statistical information that I didn't have at fingertip, we're happy to see if we can be helpful. I believe we will be back here with you again tomorrow to talk about a different program and a different set of policy areas to be helpful. And at some point in time, if you're doing a follow-up on this initial story, you're welcome to reach out to Catherine, and Catherine through Bridget will be happy to give you whatever those follow-up steps are on either of these programs. And of course, Dr. Gordon and her colleagues, John Ravitz and the people at BCW are always available for any questions you have. Their vision of the economy is not just what government is doing, but much more broadly based, and certainly helpful to you in your follow-up. So thank you all for coming. Have a good day. Stay safe.